Citation 195 is Staffers got $30,000 before home opened. The Detroit Free Press, February 6, 1972. Staffers at a Wayne County halfway home under investigation for possible mismanagement said Saturday they had received more than $30,000 in salaries even before the home was rented. According to Dr. Mary Tidlaska, director of the project, about a third of the $90,000, that would be a third, in federal funds spent on the home went to pay 9 staffers hired last summer, 5 months before the home was rented in December. The home used to treat delinquent boys opened in January when its first and so far only 3 residents arrived 9 months after planning for it began when the federal grant was approved. Another 13,000 or 13,500 to $18,000 or to $16,000 in federal money was spent to furnish and partly renovate the house at 1764 West Forest. The home, which may now be closed by the Wayne County Board of Commissioners because of alleged mismanagement, is also costing the federal government $300 a month in rent, despite the fact that it needs an estimated $4,000 more in repairs. Dr. Tidlaska of the Wayne County Child Development Center, which administers the project, said the staff was hired when it looked as if the county had found a house for the project. But, she said, red tape and federal and county rules regarding the house caused extra months of delays. Because of the problems, the staffers spent time in training programs and working temporarily in other county child welfare programs. The Forest House was finally rented and the staff began work there in December after all requirements were approved by the grant programs, the Omnibus Crime Control Program, and Model Cities Agency, she said. 2 13-year-old boys and 1 11-year-old now living there were referred to the home by juvenile court. They spend time taking special classes in rented space at a nearby church from a teacher hired by the project, and in taking field trips and working with the staff social worker and psychologist. The 3 boys sleep in one large room, sparsely decorated in red, white, and blue, and eat together with staff members in a dining room where a still uncompleted, unfulfilled aquarium is one of their current projects. Kitchen appliances, desks for the house office, a couch, and living room chairs, and single beds for 10 to 13 boys were bought. Most of the money spent on renovation has been used to buy paint and cleaning supplies. The work was done by the staff members, Dr. Tidlaska said. Other major repair work, however, has not been completed. Both front and back doors of the house are shattered and need replacing, and nearly all of the windows need new glass. In addition, the upstairs toilet near the boys' room does not work, and the downstairs bath off the dining room is broken. County commissioners have questioned why Dr. Tidlaska chose a house so badly in need of repair. She said she spent 18 months searching the model neighborhood area where the grant required the home be located for a suitable house. Commissioner Rose Mary C. Robinson has also asked why the West Forest house was rented from the Reverend Lewis L. Redmond, the same man who was charging the county $200 monthly rent for the classroom space in his church, the Cass Methodist Church, 3901 Cass. Mr. Redmond said Saturday that he had the house available and rented both it and the church space because he knew the project directors needed 2 places. They're really getting a deal on the church, and the house is a lot lower than they could find elsewhere in this area, he said. Citation 196. Minister's son dies in shooting. Detroit Free Press, May 7, 1976. A Detroit minister's son was killed Thursday night by a shot apparently intended for a friend who had sought the young man's help in a dispute. Police say Robert Redmond, 24, was shot a short time after he and Stephen Simpson, 18, asked police at the 13th Woodward Precinct Station to arrest 2 other young men. When police said they were unable to act immediately, Redmond told them, "We'll settle it ourselves," and left the station with Simpson. Police said Redmond, the son of the Reverend Lewis L. Redmond of the Cass United Methodist Church and Center, and Simpson then returned to an apartment at 4131 3rd, where Simpson earlier had argued with the 2 men. At the apartment, Simpson demanded the return of an umbrella he had left behind, police said, and he and Brian Manier, 17, struggled over it. Police said Manier pulled the .22 revolver and fired 4 shots at Simpson. They all missed Simpson, but one hit Redmond in the upper chest. He died at the scene at 6:45 p.m. Police arrested Manier and his companion, Ricky Copley, 22, who rented the apartment. Sergeant Dan Nold of the homicide section said the original argument began when Copley and Manier objected to Simpson leaving the apartment. Nold said at that time Manier pulled the gun on Simpson, who then went to Redmond for help. Following the shooting, the Reverend Lewis Redmond said his son was my right-hand man at the church center, where many area residents seek help. Mr. Redmond said his son had hoped to become a minister, too. Citation 197, the case notes of Detective Corey Williams, January 3, 2006 entry. First interview of Redacted. Today, my partner, Ron McPhee, and I went to Redacted, interviewed Redacted. We advised Redacted that we understood that he has lived in the Cass Corridor area his entire life and knows just about everyone that lived here at one time or another. We told Redacted that we are interested in what he knows about child pedophile pornography rings that were operating in the Cass Corridor in the 1970s. Redacted began talking to us right away with what appeared to be a sense of relief about how he was molested in the 1960s in Detroit by a subject known as Charles Chuck Costas, who later ran for mayor of the city of Detroit. Redacted began to cry, talking about being molested as a child, stating that he had a terrible childhood and that his mother was a prostitute in the Cass Corridor. Redacted continued to talk about how his prostitute mother would take him to a dentist office at Grand River in Trumbull in the early 60s, and she would allow the dentist to sexually molest Redacted in return for free dental care. Redacted could not recall the dentist's name. Redacted became upset, stating that kids were being molested and disappeared all the time in the early to mid-70s in the Cass area, and no one did anything about it until kids started disappearing in Oakland County. Redacted said that it wasn't until he moved in with the Redmond family at the Cass Methodist Church that he felt safe. During a later interview with Redacted, he told me that when he was approximately 16 years old, Pastor Lewis Redmond would watch Redacted take a shower. Redacted was close with Redmond's son, Robert Redmond, that was shot and killed in Brian Reardon and Ricky Copley's apartment on 3rd near Alexandrine in May of 1976, over the rape of a kid named Steve, Redacted, by Reardon and Copley. Redacted was a friend of Robert Redmond's. So that wasn't featured in the previous article. Citation 198. Cass Church hums with life each day. The Detroit Free Press, July 14, 1973. Mr. Redmond keeps the church open on Sunday afternoons. A former Michigan farm boy, he recalls, I used to die on Sunday afternoon. There was nothing to do. Ride a horse or something. That's what the farm boy recalled. His staff of five all work Sundays. Friday night is also a big time at the church. He shows movies with popcorn for all. This area cries for a good movie, he says. An Indian club will entertain between reels this week, he said. The Cass Church program includes Mondays, preschool activities, senior citizen lunches, clubs, cooking clubs for girls, ping pong for boys, game hour in the gym, boys club program, movies, pop, pool, etc. for servicemen and Wayne State students. Wayne State University, Francis Sheldon was affiliated with. Citation 199. Case notes of Detective Corey Williams, December 20th, 2005. Interview of George McMahon. Today, John, Gary, and I went and interviewed George McMahon about his involvement in the child pornography ring that was operating in the Cass Corridor in the late 70s. George told us that he has lived at his house at Redacted in Detroit since 1968. George said that he was retired from Detroit Public Schools and was employed as the local school liaison for the Burton Elementary School situated at Cass Avenue in Detroit. George said that he currently is a sociology professor at Madonna University in Livonia and teaches 5 classes per semester. George also said that he attended Wayne State University for approximately 20 years, from the mid-60s until the early 80s, when he earned his advanced degrees. Okay. George told detectives that he has been involved in running local community team programs in the Cass area for many years and has also been involved with the Cass Methodist Church. George talked about knowing Pastor Lewis Redmond and his wife, along with Pastor Felix Lorenz, but stated that he was not real close with them. George admitted knowing Bob Moore and said that he knew that Bob was involved in young kids and that he thought that Bob was a pedophile. George said that he had seen lots of young boys hanging around Bob's house on Henry Street in Detroit, where Bob ran a bike shop out of. George also said that he remembers a guy that was also into the young boys that ran a bike shop out of a house on Trumbull near Grand River in Detroit. This information matches what Faye Goley told me during an earlier interview. It kind of goes to show here just the oddness of the inconsistencies with redaction, because Faye Goley's last name was redacted in a separate entry of Corey Williams. She said that she thought that Bob Moore's bike shop was on Trumbull in Detroit. George went on to say that he never saw Bob involved in any sexual acts with kids and had no knowledge of Bob or others being involved in any filming of child pornography. George said that a boy named Redacted was one that hung around Bob Moore's bike shop. I asked George if he knew Donnie, Redacted, from Bob Moore's house. At first he said that he thought he remembered that name and later changed his mind, stating he was thinking of someone else. When George was asked about Ted Orr, he said that he didn't know that name. Ted Orr is the other alias of Ted Lamborghini. Ted was supposedly good friends with Bob Moore and was at Moore's home quite often. I showed George a picture of Ted, and George said he thought he looked familiar, but he wasn't sure. During our interview, George received several phone calls from a person George said was Andy Kuhn, who George said was 38 years old. George then began to run these names by this Kuhn guy on the phone, which would have been way too young back then. George said that Andy Kuhn's family owns a local bar in this area. I asked George if he knew Richard Lawson, to which he stated that it kind of sounds familiar, but he didn't think so. I showed George a picture of Lawson from 1977, and he said that he did not recognize him. George also said that he did not know Francis or Frank Sheldon. When we began talking to George about Chuck Flieger, George said he didn't know that name. I showed George a picture of Chuck, then he said, "Oh right, Chuck Flieger. Yes, I know him." After conversation with George about Chuck, it was determined that Chuck had come on to George on several occasions, sexually, but George said they never had sexual relations. George told detectives that Chuck stabbed him in the stomach, showing detectives his scar, stating it was over some money from their business they were in together, which was Cass Construction Company. Later, George told us that Chuck was making sexual advances toward him and that he turned Chuck down, and Chuck became upset, and that's when Chuck stabbed him. George then said that Chuck Flieger lived with them for a while. I asked George when the last time was that he saw Chuck, to which he stated about 2 years ago. George asked a couple of times if Chuck was still alive. He also stated that Bob Moore is dead. Died a while ago, didn't he? During other conversations, George told us that his son, who is 35 years old, lives in Amsterdam and works for the KLM Corporation. George said that he had another son that was killed years ago in the Cass Corridor area. George denied knowing Jim Tippett, and he was shown a photo of Tippett.